He was 12 years old, standing on a sidewalk in Hell's Kitchen, and his father was telling him to kick a man who was already on the ground. Not because Wilson Fisk did anything wrong, because his father did. He lost an election, lost face, lost the fragile thing that kept his rage pointed anywhere but home. But once he lost, the rage needed a place to land. So Wilson kicked, and something shifted inside him, not toward cruelty, toward understanding. The world doesn't hand you power, you take it, or it takes you. You already know someone who learned that lesson young. You might be that person. Wilson Fisk may be the most psychologically complicated villain in the Marvel Universe, not because he's unpredictable, because he's completely coherent. He has a worldview, a moral framework, and a love story that would be beautiful if it weren't wrapped around so much damage. He's a man who grew up poor and humiliated in Hell's Kitchen, watched power used against him from every angle, and decided to become the largest, most immovable thing in every room. He built a criminal empire, not to rule for its own sake, but to reshape the city that broke him into something worthy of the people he loves. He does terrible things. His origin story starts off with a terrible thing that he did to his father. He knows they're terrible, and he does them anyway, because in his mind, the city that emerges on the other side will justify every single one of them. That's not a supervillain's logic. That's a human being's logic. And that's why he's worth looking at closely, uncomfortably, as a mirror. The boy who got called Fatty in Hell's Kitchen grew up to buy Hell's Kitchen. It wasn't a coincidence. It was by design. The psychologist Heinz Kohut spent decades studying what happens when a child's sense of self is damaged early and deeply. When the environment that's supposed to reflect worth back at them sends contempt instead. What emerges, Kohut found, is what he called the grandiose self, a compensatory structure the psyche builds over the wound. Not genuine confidence, something harder than that, a self-concept that's so fortified it can never again be touched by the same hands that broke it in the first place. Wilson Fisk didn't become enormous by accident. The suits, the power, the ownership, these aren't indulgences, they're armor. And here's where it stops being about him. You've built armor too. Maybe not an empire, maybe a title, a reputation, a very specific way of carrying yourself in rooms where you once felt small. The form is different. The function is identical. What makes Fisk genuinely disturbing and genuinely fascinating is that the armor didn't deaden him. He's not numb. He's one of the most feeling characters in the Marvel Universe, and the clearest evidence of that is Vanessa. His love for her is real. That's the thing the character keeps insisting on and the thing that keeps being confirmed. He's not using her. He's not performing tenderness while calculating something else. When Wilson Fisk is with Vanessa, the fortress comes down. She is the only room in his life without surveillance. And psychologists call this compartmentalization, the mind's ability to maintain separate emotional realities that never communicate with each other. One room, the man who orders violence without flinching. In another room, he's the man who stands in a gallery describing a painting with the soft vulnerability of someone who has never learned how to be cool about the things he loves. We find compartmentalization disturbing in people like Fisk because it reminds us that cruelty and love are not opposites. They coexist in human beings with alarming ease. Maybe you've seen it in someone you know. Maybe you've felt it in yourself. The capacity to be genuinely tender with one person while being capable of real damage somewhere else. The self is not one unified thing. It's a bunch of rooms, and we control which ones we let people into. But the deepest part of Fisk, the part that makes you sit with the discomfort long after the credits, is the reason he gives for everything. He wants to make Hell's Kitchen better, and he means it. This is where psychologist Albert Bandura becomes essential. Bandura spent years studying what he called moral disengagement, the cognitive process by which people behave harmfully and still maintain their sense of themselves as moral agents. It doesn't require lying to yourself. It requires reframing. A noble cause, Bandura wrote, can sanctify ugly deeds. Once you decided that what you're building is worth the cost becomes a detail. The violence becomes infrastructure. The crime becomes urban renewal with different paperwork. Fisk has one of the most sophisticated moral disengagement architectures in fiction. He isn't the villain who cackles at damage. He's the villain who genuinely believes that the damage is temporary and the vision is permanent. That if you could just see what Hell's Kitchen looks like on the other side of all this, you would understand. You might even thank him. Here's the part that should sit uncomfortably with you. Daredevil does this too. Spider-Man does this. Every vigilante in the Marvel Universe and otherwise has a story that justifies why their particular brand of harm is actually a form of help. The difference between Fisk and the heroes isn't the logic. The logic is identical. The difference is what they're willing to destroy on the way to the city they're building. And if you've ever told yourself that you did something harmful for the right reasons, if you've ever hurt someone and immediately found the explanation that made it necessary, then you've used Bandura's mechanism. Not at Fisk's scale, but in the same key. We all have a Hell's Kitchen we're trying to rebuild. We all have a story about why the way we're rebuilding it is justified. The question Kingpin forces you to ask is, at what point does the vision stop excusing the method? With Kingpin, you see a man who turned childhood shame into an identity so large it became a city. You've seen love that's real and total and coexists without apparent contradiction, with enormous capacity for harm. You've seen the story we tell ourselves about why the damage we do is actually construction. And you've seen how that story becomes indistinguishable from the stories the people we call heroes tell about themselves. Wilson Fisk is not a monster pretending to be a visionary. He's a wounded child who built a fortress and called it urban planning. The crime is real. The love is real. The vision is real. And none of those things cancel the others out. That's the most human thing about Kingpin, and the most unsettling. You might be more like Kingpin than you realize. Not because you're dangerous, because you've known the shame that turns into armor. Because you've done something you knew was wrong with a reason so right it almost convinced you. There is one room in your life, just one, where the walls come down. And because somewhere there's a version of something broken that you're trying to remake in your own image, certain that if people could only see the finished version, they would finally understand. The question isn't whether you have the vision, it's what you're willing to do to get there. Hey, if you enjoyed this video and you'd like me to do the same kind of treatment to some of your favorite characters, post it in the comments. And if you love great fiction, be sure to check out my novels in the link in the description, and my latest novel in the link in the pinned comments. If you enjoyed this video, you should check out the one I did about The Housemaid.